Minute postponement of our briefing is outrageous, it's evasive, it's derelict. They're bobbing and weaving and ducking. There is a legal obligation for the administration to inform Congress about precisely what is happening. What are they afraid of?
That's Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer reacting to the postponement of the briefings the Senate and House were set to receive today involving Iran. Neither body has been briefed. The Senate's briefing was rescheduled for Thursday. The House briefing has been rescheduled for Friday. Now, even though Speaker Mike Johnson and congressional Republicans have ceded nearly all of their legislative authority to Donald Trump, Congress still has the sole authority to declare war. And as Donald Trump attempts to negotiate Middle East peace over Truth Social, there is a bipartisan push to curb Donald Trump's authority when it comes to sending our country into war in Iran. Joining our coverage is former Army Ranger, Democratic Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado. He sits on the House Intel Committee. Michael Crowley and Ned Price are with us as well. Congressman, tell me the state of your access to information, either intelligence or from the military, about the announcement Donald Trump made to the country at large on Saturday night.
Well, Nicole, I sit on the House Intelligence Committee, so I have access to a lot of information about what our government is doing and what it knows. And what I can tell you is I haven't seen any information at no point in the last year that would show an imminent risk of attack to Americans or U.S. facilities that would trigger the authority of the president to conduct a unilateral, non-congressionally authorized strike against Iran. I haven't seen it. So if they have it, I would love for them to show it to us. They canceled the briefings. They haven't engaged us. But this is not just a debate about process. And this is important for America to realize that we're not having a process debate. Why this is important is because when we stop having public discussions about use of force and military action, when we stop debating it, when Congress stops voting on it, what you end up with is a 20-year-long war that cost Americans $3 trillion, 6,000 American lives, and an incalculable amount of U.S. credibility. We've been here recently. We've done that. It's time for this madness to end. There's no appetite in America for another engagement like this in the Middle East.
When you talk about seeing absolutely no evidence about an imminent threat posed by Iran, how does that square with what the administration is saying? I mean, Trump rather publicly said he thought Tulsi Gabbard was wrong. Did you take that to mean that everything you've seen is inaccurate and there's some secret pile of intelligence that he sees that your committee hasn't? Or how do you understand right now where Donald Trump is getting his information and his intelligence from?
Well, this is exactly the point. You can't square it. You can't make sense of it. And there should not be a pile of intelligence out there that the president has seen that the House Intelligence Committee is not, because we are the authority that makes the law. We actually approve the budget, the classified annex of the IAA. So there should be nothing. There should literally be nothing that the president is seeing that we are not, because we are, by Constitution, we are the ones who make the budget and approve these programs, approve covert action, and authorize these programs that they rely on. So you just simply can't square it. But, this reminds me, I'm a father, and this reminds me of when my kids were toddlers and you would just say something that is just patently true. My child would be like, no, it's a lie. It's not true. I'm like, well, yeah, it is true. No, it's not true. And then would fall on the floor and start writhing around and kicking their arms and legs. This is classic Trump. The intelligence community is saying one thing. He just says, no, it's not true. They're lying. The problem is this is so much more dangerous than dealing with children, because we have seen, once again, what happens when politics drives military action instead of intelligence. That you end up with a 20-year debacle with a lot of damage to a lot of people.
You see the strain on at least two agencies already. You see his chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, not matching Trump's language about, quote, total obliteration, language that his White House press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, doubles down on in reporting in the New York Times about, quote, total obliteration. Chairman Kane did not use that language, was much more circumspect, hewed to what is known, the facts that are available. And you see, as we've been discussing, that Tulsi Gabbard, his DNI, did not reach the same conclusion. What does that mean underneath those leaders? What is happening inside those two institutions, the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies?
Well, what's happening is what's been happening for over 6 months now is nobody's at the wheel, right? Most of the senior leadership at the Department of Defense has resigned in protest to Pete Hegseth. You have a grossly abused person, a DNI, politicizing intelligence already at the CIA and within our intelligence community. And then you have, a White House press secretary that's trying to gaslight America by saying, hey, we all know what happens when you drop a bunch of 30,000-pound bombs. Obviously, it was obliterated. Well, here's a history lesson for you. Over 60 years ago, the United States built a bomb-proof complex called Cheyenne Mountain. A lot of people have heard of it. It was the complex that houses NORAD. It's in Colorado, just a little bit south of my district. Over 60 years ago, we built a complex, a command and control center that actually could withstand a nuclear blast. Don't you think that in that 60 years, the technology still exists? Maybe would be a little bit more advanced, so you could build a complex that could withstand some big bombs? Obviously, you can't. So, the reality here is vastly different from what this administration would have you to believe. You simply cannot bomb your way out of this. And here's the final point. Ultimately, we will solve this. Iran is a dangerous and malignant regime. There's no doubt about that, and cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. But to prevent that from happening, we need something that is permanent and verifiable. And that has to be a deal with inspections. A deal not dissimilar from what Donald Trump ripped up in 2018 under his first administration. There is no way you're ever going to bomb your way out of it, because that is not permanent and it's not verifiable.
Congressman Jason Crow, please come back after your briefing and let us know if there was some mystery pile of intel somewhere that none of us knew about. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
Ned Price, let me ask you to pick up where the congressman left off about this absolute disconnect from what was known prior to Saturday and this real departure into propaganda that the president in two public that I've seen beatings of the press for covering what other people in his government are saying, and the White House press secretary doubling down on, quote, obliteration.
Look, Nicole, the congressman alluded to a really important point, and I think it's something we can't forget. Intelligence is not an end in and of itself. Intelligence is an input to the policymaking process. And if I were in my old job at the State Department, my last job at the State Department, and I were to have received a report like this, to me, it would mean that, wow, we really need to light a fire under ourselves to work overtime, to try to reach some diplomatic resolution to see to it that Iran couldn't use any remaining stockpiles of enriched uranium, any remaining centrifuges to make a sprint towards even a crude nuclear device. We would need to get our policymaking process into overdrive. My concern with this administration, Nicole, is that, as you know well, speaking truth to power is an occupational hazard under President Trump. We saw it under his first term. We're seeing it play out now in real time in his second term. Look at Tulsi Gabbard, who is very much on the outs, who's now issuing fawning tweets along with the CIA director, who today nominated President Trump for a Nobel Prize to try to get on his good side. Look, my first job in government was at the CIA, and I recall one of the first controversial things that I wrote. I was probably 23, 24 at the time. I went with my boss's boss to brief some very senior people in government, and we briefed the conclusions, and the reaction we got was, this is totally off base. Who's responsible for this? And I was about to raise my hand because I was the one who wrote it. And instead, my boss's boss said, I'm responsible for it. That was the ethos that I learned at the CIA in the immediate aftermath of the Iraq War debacle, where it was a virtue to speak truth to power. It was a virtue to make sure that your findings, however controversial, your assessments, however inconvenient to policy, made their way to policymakers. I'm afraid that's not happening in this case. And because it's not happening, I'm afraid that they won't make the decisions that our national security requires them to make in a moment of what is some extreme peril.
Michael Crowley, can you speak to the president's conduct in this moment? The frenetic pace of the social media posts, the F-bombs on the South Lawn, the most harsh attacks against the media, I think, since he's been back in the White House?
Absolutely, Nicole. I mean, that's been a defining feature of this crisis over the last couple of weeks. And the concern about that would be that, look, we're talking about the gravest matters of national security. You know, we're talking about war and peace, the stability of the Middle East, and we're talking about nuclear weapons. And by all appearances, you have a president who is acting to a large degree out of pique, out of anger, resentment, asserting his pride and ego. And obviously, any world leader has some of those characteristics to different degrees. But I just can't think of a time, certainly outside of a Trump presidency, when we have seen foreign policy conducted in this way that feels like this psychology that is unchained and released for the world to see in real time in an incredibly volatile way. And you get the sense that decision making, or you worry that decision making is being based on these very volatile emotions, certainly more than what the intelligence is saying about the facts on the ground. You know, I'll just briefly say that, you know, the counter argument to this is the president's supporters say that, you know, there's madman theory going on here. No one knows what Trump is going to do next. He's able to sort of overpower and confuse his opponents. And there could be truth to that. But I don't think anyone could deny that there are great risks to the first approach that I described playing out. And it makes this situation so much more unpredictable.